All right, here we go, everyone. Another awesome episode of the All Around Adventure podcast. I'm excited to welcome Brie Burgett to the podcast, who is a Marine Corps officer, adventurer, and the creator and author of the travel blog, The Brie Adventure. So, Brie, thanks so much for taking time for joining me today, and welcome to the All Around Adventure podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to getting you on the podcast. And, I've been following you on social media for a while now, and you just seem to be going to so many amazing places. And I will say this about you. You have a very interesting mix of adventures that you go on to. It's like, seems like one post I'm seeing you on a beautiful beach somewhere, and the next thing I see you at the top of some snow-capped mountain. So it's just, you're definitely finding your way around the world quite a bit lately.
Yep, you only get one life, and I want to go on all the different types of adventures. And so it's definitely a mix. Sometimes it's beautiful, nice, relaxing vacations, but more often than not, it's some type of adventure in some remote destination. So try and keep it interesting in different places and types of trips that I go on.
Yeah, well, the world certainly does have a lot to offer, so much to choose from, for sure. But anyway, there's a lot to your story, and we're going to try to cover as much as we can today in this episode. But as I typically like to do with my guests, I just kind of want to go back to the beginning, I suppose. Every great story has a beginning. So with you, as I mentioned when I introduced you, you are currently a Marine Corps officer. And I'm also curious because I'm a former Marine myself, but what was it that set you on that path? Like, take us back here and just tell us what inspired you to join the Marine Corps.
Absolutely. So I graduated high school young. I was 15 and went straight into college.
Say
what? So
I
was finishing up college when I was 19 years old and looking around. I was debating different options, and looking at the foreign service was something I was really interested in. And you had to be 21 to take the foreign service officer exam. So then I started looking a little bit more at military options, and I thought that would be a great way to be able to give back to a country that I came from a very socioeconomically challenged family. And so getting to go to college was through academic scholarships. And I really appreciated the chance in the US to be able to kind of start from scratch and build your own life and take it any direction. And I thought the military would be a great way to give back, but then also to gain a lot of great leadership experience, and get to travel and hopefully see the world is something I think that draws a lot of people into the military. And looked around at the different branches, and especially being so young, coming out of college, a lot of them were offering all these great things that you could do. And the Marine Corps was like, well, if you can make it. And I think they target the way that they approach recruiting very well, because it draws the right people into the Marine Corps that have that, like, I can absolutely do this type of mentality. And so I joined the Marine Corps at 19 and went to OCC that fall. So it was the direct commissioning program. And first up was a combat engineer, and absolutely loved it. So I thought I was going to stay in for like 3 or 4 years. And 11 years later, here I am still playing Marine, absolutely loving it. I did just switch over to the reserves, but I fully intend to stay in the Marine Corps as long as it's still a good time for me and I'm still enjoying it, as well as the Marine Corps keeps wanting me to stick around. So it's been a good adventure so far, for sure.
All right. Outstanding. Now, I'm kind of curious, what did the conversation look like with friends and family members once you ultimately did make the decision to join the Marine Corps? Because graduating high school at 15 and then college at 19, I think it goes without saying you clearly had the potential to do a vast array of many other things if you wanted to pursue them. So I guess, what did the conversation look like when you told everyone, okay, well, I'm actually going to go join the military, versus potentially any other thing, maybe going to grad school next or like whatever. So what did that look like for you when you made that decision?
I think it shocked some people a lot, especially family members, and it took them a while to kind of come around to terms that it wasn't just like a split minute decision to like join the military. And I don't think that they really thought I was serious with it until I actually went through and commissioned and started doing the Marine Corps thing, and going to Okinawa was my first duty station. But then I think a lot of my closer friends were like, ah, actually, this kind of fits your personality of wanting to take on a big challenge and like prove that you can do it and make it all the way through. And so I think it was kind of a mixed reaction between the people that knew me a little bit better, that it wasn't quite as much of a surprise, but for the rest, it kind of took a while. And some are still coming around to the idea of the military and the Marine Corps.
Yeah, for sure. So now getting commissioned, did you go through OCS to get commissioned, or did you start off enlisted and then kind of like work your way through? I mean, what did your path to becoming an officer look like?
So I did OCC. So that was where you go and you do the 10-week commissioning program. So I did it in the fall of 2011. And then went straight from there into the combat engineer school, or TBS, and then combat engineer school, and then over to Oki.
Okay. So, all right. Very, very cool. Now, getting over to like Okinawa, like before this, have you had very much in the way of traveling like overseas anywhere? Or would you say that Okinawa was maybe actually the first time that you actually got on a plane and crossed an ocean?
So actually, my parents worked with different NGOs, so the non-governmental organizations, and we lived between Ohio and Hungary growing up.
Oh, cool.
They helped with like the Kosovo crisis with different refugee camps. And so I saw kind of a very different world through that aspect. But I think having that unique experience growing up definitely opened up my aperture to being willing and very interested in traveling. But Okinawa was kind of the first real step into like living overseas. I did buy a one-way plane ticket that summer when I was waiting to hear if I got accepted into the Marine Corps. I was like, it's a good time for adventure. So I bought a one-way plane ticket and moved to Australia. Did a whole summer of working in a restaurant and playing around Australia, learning to scuba dive, and then came back. And then Okinawa was my first time kind of more established living overseas. And it was great because there you have so many opportunities to do the exercises in the Philippines and Thailand. And then also the personal travel that when you have 4-day weekends over there, you can jump on a plane and go to Hong Kong or go to Bali. And so that definitely started kind of my spree of traveling, where it was like, I was going to go on a trip, and if people could come and join me, great. And if not, I just would do solo trips by myself. And that was kind of the beginning of this constant travel that I've been doing kind of the last 10 years of just looking whatever's unique and crazy around the area that I'm living in and looking for cheap ways to travel, because I think that's one of the things is it's easy to get intimidated by expenses. But when you live in different places, especially in Japan, it's really cheap to catch a quick flight over to somewhere for $100 or $200. So it definitely opened up the travel experiences that I was having compared to what I was doing in college or anything before.
Right on. So something stood out to me just now. You mentioned that some of these travels that you were doing in and around like Southeast Asia when you were stationed in Okinawa, many of them were solo trips. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you, and I like to ask this to all the women that come on my podcast, because I have a lot of women in my life who are, they either hear stories from myself or they may, see some really cool, amazing posts from, travelers on social media like yourself, and they love the idea of going out and traveling, but they're often afraid to because safety is something that they're concerned about, and especially by themselves. So I was just kind of curious, like when you kind of started traveling around Southeast Asia, or maybe just even like when you went to Australia or any other time before this, was safety something that you were concerned about at all? And if so, how did you kind of counteract that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially because I know a lot of women also that are concerned. They like the idea of the solo trip and getting on a plane and going somewhere. And I think there's some very basic ways that you can stay a little safer, because unfortunately, the world that we live in, it still is more dangerous for women. And there's things that I talk about with my friends when I come back, and the guy friends in the group are like, I wouldn't have even considered like not wanting to walk home alone at night from a bar of what could potentially happen, or
Right.
drinking too much, of the potential risks of that. And unfortunately, like I said, it's something that you do have to deal with and you do have to take into account. But I think a lot of times even the destinations and countries that I've gone to, of like, I went to Turkey by myself and traveled around the country. And that's a place that I think there's a lot of negative perceptions about different places, that they are really unsafe. And the reality on the ground is that so many places are much more travel friendly, and they do accommodate solo travelers. And it's easy, I think, especially a lot of the travel I've done, I've stayed in hostels, and you meet other travelers that are also by themselves, and then you end up going out with a group. And so I think there are ways that when you're solo traveling, you can definitely meet others, go on like a walking tour, go on a pub crawl with a group of other people. And so there's still ways that you get the safety in numbers, even when you are traveling by yourself. In the beginning, I was definitely very naive, and I did things like couch surfing and stayed in some dodgy places with some very odd people. And looking back, I would never recommend like a young woman to do the same type of things that I did. But I think I learned quickly from some of those experiences of like, all right, there's ways that I could do this that are much safer. And even doing basic things like checking in with people before going out on a trip or before doing something that night, and just following up, that if somebody else is kind of aware of where you're at, it gives you a little bit more ease. And it also is a safety check that if something does happen, you know, somebody else is aware of where you're at and can potentially flag it if there was an issue. But again, overall, I think there's a lot more of just like the negative perception that's built into the solo traveling that isn't necessarily the case. And there's so many safe destinations and places to go that, especially if it's somebody that's new to traveling, go to a place in Europe that's like very friendly to travelers. And I think that kind of gives you a little bit more confidence in doing it before you go to maybe more off the road locations that might be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, because depending on like where you go, especially for an American traveling abroad, like blending in may be a little bit simpler in some places than it is others. I mean, obviously, like with you with your long blonde hair, you could blend in anywhere in Europe, but then if you were to go to like somewhere in the Middle East or in Africa, then yeah, you're going to stand out, you know, quite a bit too. So I think it's just so I guess if you've kind of been around like Europe yourself and other places. So would you recommend any, I guess I'll say gateway countries? There's probably a better term I can come up with that. But I guess like any gateway countries that if someone does want to go out and travel, and maybe they do still have some of these reservations about wanting to go out and see the world, where do you think would be a good place to start? Is there any countries that may come to mind?
Yeah, I think especially like Northern Europe. So like Norway is a great one. Iceland is a beautiful place. Some of those are a little bit more expensive, like the Sweden, Finland, the price of a trip there is just higher. But there's also the Mediterranean, like going to Croatia is one I think I've done 2 or 3 times by myself, because it was such a great place, very cheap, tons of things to see and do there, tons of other solo travelers. And so I think the Med is a really easy one to like bounce around, and you have so many people that are going that you're never really alone. Easy to find people to do things with, and there's so many different activities that, again, kind of the safety in numbers, that you're never going to be isolated somewhere. You can walk around. It's a totally safe area. So yeah, I think in general, though, I think Europe is kind of an easy starting point that you can. I drove all over. I was just stationed in Germany for like the last 3.5, almost 4 years. Made it to every country and all the micro states in Europe. So I went all over the place, took trains, took cheap Euro wings, like 20 euro airplane trip sometimes. It's just really, there's great inexpensive ways to travel there. And there's so many other people that are doing it that you make friends in destinations all over the place. So it's really easy, and it's a great place, I think, especially for Americans to feel a little bit more secure and kind of blend in and not, like you said, stand out quite so much there, which makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, and also one thing I really liked about traveling around Europe, I mean, of course, there is the cheap flight aspect that you just mentioned, but I just loved how everything is just so easily connected by rail systems too. I really wish we had a more robust rail network here stateside, because I think
Yes.
I think it'd be utilized quite a bit. But I love that because when I lived in England for a year, and I just loved how easy it was for me to just like being a foreigner, not owning a car or anything like that, just being able to 2 hours later on a train, I'm in London and I'm doing all cool stuff around London, or I could head to the Manchester airport and get direct flights to like Dubai or Israel or something like that. So it's so nice how everything's so interconnected. But I want to zoom in on Germany here for a second, because a few years ago, I spent Christmas and New Year's in Germany, and I loved it there. So can you kind of take me through? It is a little bit selfish on my part, just taking a trip down memory lane, but where were some of the cities and highlights from that country?
When you said Christmas, my face lit up because of the Christmas markets. I
Mhm.
got there in November timeframe, so it was like the beginning of Christmas market season, and that quickly became my obsession. And I did end up going to like Austria and Switzerland too, but especially like Dresden. They have the beautiful, however, that was one of the biggest disappointments of like the social media, Instagram versus reality, was they have this Devil's Bridge there up in Leipzig, and it's this beautiful like ring, and it reflects in the water, and the pictures of it look absolutely amazing on social media. So I rented a car and like drove out to see this bridge, and it was under construction. The pond was drained. There was like construction tape around it. It was the worst thing ever. But Dresden was absolutely beautiful for the Christmas market. So Hamburg was a really fun town. I just, again, tried to like kind of drive all over. I was living in Stuttgart, which was a beautiful place. So it's really close to the border of both Switzerland and France. Easy to bounce across and go to both of those. But they have so many of the very picturesque, like storybook little towns there of Nuremberg, Rothenburg, and it's a beautiful little area. And then the end of my time there was during COVID, and they were, not surprisingly, very strict with the lockdown, had very strict rules in place, but it was great. I was just within the little circle that I was allowed to go to was a drop zone. So skydiving had been on my bucket list for years. So I went and got my skydiving license there. Had to learn
Nice.
a little bit more German. I didn't really speak any. But it was, yeah, it was a gorgeous place. And especially for the Christmas markets, like you made it there during the right time of year. Oktoberfest is another big thing. Like everyone goes to Munich, but I think some of the smaller towns like Stuttgart has their own Oktoberfest called different things, Volkfest in Stuttgart, and they have a spring one. And those are really fun. So if there's a chance to like go there for work or to time a trip to Europe to hit one of those fests, definitely go to the Munich one because it's the classic. However, go to one of the other smaller ones because everyone's in the dirndls and the lederhosen and singing the songs, and it's just a great atmosphere and one of the best times of the year to live there.
Yeah, when you just mentioned Dresden, yeah, my eyes lit up there for a moment, because Dresden is where I did spend Christmas when I was there. And then, yes, I do very fondly remember going through like the Christmas markets, and, there's all the lights, there's all the vendors. I'm just like, I was in like hog heaven. Let me tell you, Brie, just getting all the different types of food that, was lined up on all the stalls, so like in this particular one in Dresden had like a couple rides, like it had a Ferris wheel and everything like that. It was quite special. And yeah, so those Christmas markets do have a special place in my heart. I feel like, yes, I would have to double back there at some point for Christmas. And then I did, I also went to Hanover, which they had like some Christmas stuff going on there as well. And then eventually I made it up to Hamburg, where I did celebrate New Year's. And also, yeah, they really love their fireworks too. Like as soon as the stroke of midnight hit, everyone is just popping fireworks off in the street, and it was kind of glorious. So that was
Chaotic.
yeah, a tad bit chaotic, yes, but certainly a lot of fun. So I appreciate this conversation because I can't recall another moment on the podcast where I really got to like reminisce about my time in Germany this much. This is actually quite nice. Yeah. So, all right. Well, those are some highlights, for sure that we were just talking about, just in and around Europe. But I think another thing that a lot of people like to hear about and that are just also make for funny stories, maybe not funny in the moment, but a little bit more after the fact. And that is that we all often have misadventures and, some things don't always go according to plan while we're out and about. So if I could maybe just dive in the weeds here a little bit and ask you, what have been some of your misadventures that you've faced along the bay, albeit not catastrophic ones, I would hope.
So I have a bad habit of getting injured, at least usually like once a year that I do something stupid. One of the biggest ones was the running of the bulls. I think that's one of the things that's on a lot of people's bucket list, and it was on mine forever. I was like, I have to go to Pamplona and do the running of the bulls. And so I went, and it's actually like a week-long event. And so they do it every morning. I think it's starting at like 8 a.m. Everyone goes into the square and you line up and you're all in your white shirts and your white shorts and your little red bow ties. And I did it in the first morning, great success, like made it into the ring because it's this whole street that they block off. And once you're in, you're locked in. And then they release the bulls and you can hear them coming before you can see them around the bend. And then they're just like barreling through and people are pushing everyone down. But anyways, make it all the way into the ring, great success, go drinking all day, had such a fun time. And then the next morning was the last morning of the entire event. And I was like, well, it was great yesterday. I'm here, I might as well do it again. And mistake, like I definitely shouldn't have. And I met people the day before and I convinced them to go with me. So we all go and we do it again. And I made it into the ring and then got hit. And you hear the entire stadium just be like, ooh, and it tossed me like a little rag doll and then trampled me.
Oh,
so
gosh.
I have some nice little souvenir scars from doing that. I think it was a great experience, but I would never do it again. One of the other ones, a big misadventure. I think everyone that travels eventually, no matter how lucky you are, no matter how strong your stomach is, you get food poisoning.
Yep.
Always living on the edge this way where I want to try the local food. So I'll eat street meats and I'll eat anything that I can see. It's worth sampling. One time in Mexico, though, I went scuba diving, went down there. They have an underwater museum. And so me and two of my friends went and did this diving trip. And we went to Chichen Itza because it's one of the 7 wonders of the world and great trip. And the last night, we were staying in a hostel and one of the kids cooked this dinner. And again, like it's the basic thing that you're like, oh, if a 17-year-old kid in the hostel is cooking a dinner, maybe we don't eat it. But we did. And everyone got food poisoning. The first one went down that night and he was sick the entire night. And I made it until the next morning when I was going to the airport. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a rough day. Mexico City airport. I'm just like laying on the ground, sweating and having an awful time. Made it to Detroit, wintertime, delays. And I've just been like sweating and laying on a floor in the Mexico City airport all day and then have to sleep overnight in the Detroit airport. That was one of my worst travel experiences. So now I always carry the travel medicines with me like you're supposed to. But again, I think everyone probably at some point has one of those very bad food poisoning type of stories if you travel long enough.
Yeah. Well, I say that getting food poisoning is kind of sort of like a badge of honor. Like, I think if you haven't gotten it yet, you haven't been traveling enough yet. So at least that's how I would look at it, I suppose.
We're trying enough.
All right. Well, I'm for a second there, I thought you were going to say that you were going to have a misadventure while scuba diving, which I'm, really glad that turned out not to be the case. Because I mean, a lot of things can go wrong on scuba diving, and that was another thing that just perked my ears because I'm a diver myself. So I want to ask you, what's your favorite diving activity?
I'm just an open water. I've broken all the rules and done night diving, done cave diving, done the super deep dives. some of my favorite places, I think the Galapagos, I did that last year. And the amount of sea life that you see, and hammerhead sharks and penguins are there. That was one of my favorite dive spots. Like I said, I had just moved to Australia and I was just starting scuba diving. So one of my like first 5 dives was the Great Barrier Reef, which was an amazing place, and gotten to do lots of different shark diving. But that's one that's still on my list, is doing the great white off the coast of South Africa, doing one of those cage dives. Like, I just think that would be one of the coolest things. And I also want to do where you skydive. You can skydive into the blue hole in Belize and then do a water landing, drop your parachute, and then scuba dive down into the blue hole. There's like hopes and dreams for someday that I just have to get the water qual with the skydiving. And I went to Belize last year and was trying to do this, and the water was too choppy the entire time. So they wouldn't take boats out to do any of the diving. But that's one of my bucket lists. Like, someday I want to do that. I feel like that's like Point Break type of
James Bond type stuff there.
Yeah, it'd be so cool to do.
Yes. Now, one thing I would recommend, since you're a diver, is one of my favorite dives was actually in Lake Superior, Michigan, because the shipwreck sites that they have in Lake Superior are so well intact, because the fresh water isn't obviously eroding like any of these ships. So like that's where I got my shipwreck certification, was in Lake Superior. And of course, as you know, I'm an archaeologist, so of course I'm going to take to the shipwrecks a little bit more than other diving activities. But I loved diving there. But the fresh water did make buoyancy a little bit of a challenge, though. Well, maybe not quite as much as the seawater would. I think I had a tougher time staying buoyant in the sea than I did the fresh water, maybe. But anyway, yeah. So shipwreck diving, I absolutely love it. But it can be eerie though with some of the shipwrecks, because Lake Superior has kind of an ominous nickname, and it's the lake that never gives up her dead, because it's very good at preserving like people who drown in the lake, like basically keeping like a fresh corpse at the bottom of the lake, which is kind of eerie. But yeah. So anyway, shipwreck diving, do you see that like in the future? Like, is there any, has that ever like jumped out at you about going to do shipwreck diving?
Yeah, and I will definitely put that one on my list. I had no idea. That sounds like a fascinating place to dive. Last year, I actually did a few. So I went to Brunei. I was supposed to climb Karstan's pyramid, which is one of the 7 summits, and I get all the way to Bali, and the mountain was still closed due to some political issues in the country. So all of a sudden I had a few extra weeks, and I went to Timor-Leste to do scuba diving there. But I went to Brunei, and they have a lot of shipwrecks that are off their coast. And so I got to do a couple that were there. They didn't let me go too deep. I think they kept me above 100 feet because of the limitations that I'm not an advanced diver. But they had some cool ones. And then a very unique one is off the coast of Croatia. They have the world's first underwater winery.
Say what?
So they age their wines in, they have regular bottles, but then they also put them in 4 jars, like the clay jars, and they age their wines under the water. And so they did all this testing, and it sounds like something you would probably be really interested in, that they did all this testing to see exactly like location with the right sunlight, consistent temperature, that they could consistently age these wines underwater. And so you get a scuba dive down, excuse me, and pull up a bottle of wine from this shipwreck and bring it up to the surface. And then you go back and you do a tasting, and then you get to take the bottle back home with you, which is very cool. And it wasn't, it was a very shallow dive, but it was still such a unique one that I had seen some YouTube video about it. And I was like, I'm doing that one. And it was really cool.
I have never heard of such a thing before. I had no idea that was even a thing. Well, I don't drink myself, but still, though, when I hear about something like that, I cannot help but be just absolutely fascinated. My goodness, that is so cool.
And it's a cool story. It's like a cool bottle just to have staged and just to show, it's not one I'm going to break open and drink, but it's a cool one to have on display.
Right on. All right. Well, okay. So one thing I want to get into now, because you just mentioned that you originally had went to Brunei because you were trying to do one of the seven summits. And that's one thing I just kind of learned about you recently is that you actually do have that goal to go for them. And you just checked off one. I think, what was it like? Just, did you get back just last week or the week before? But you like just finished this too.
Yep, it was like a week and a half because it was the end of the year when I just finished up and flew back, which is my lingering cold that I still have a little bit of a cough from whatever I picked up on the mountain.
Okay, yes. And that mountain is Aconcagua in Argentina, which is the highest mountain in the Americas. So before we actually get to you actually going to the summit, just this idea to go for this in the first place. I mean, it's just take us through what kind of drove you to decide that you want to take on this goal.
So mountain climbing was never really my thing before. After being a combat engineer, I actually became a sub-Saharan Africa regional affairs officer. So doing work all over Africa. And that's why I was living in Germany. And it's a great opportunity. I think one of the coolest thing that the military does and the Marine Corps does is let you work in all these different countries with different partner nations. And so I've been doing the Africa portfolio for like 3 or 4 years, and I was working in Uganda pretty frequently, which is one of my favorite countries. And I knew that Kilimanjaro was right next door. And so I thought, one of the cool things I think with the military is being able to take leave in conjunction with different work trips. Mm-hmm. And so I did leave in conjunction, was like, all right, I think I can do this. I'm really bad. I always sign up for things like the marathons that we were talking about a little bit without training and doing like any preparation. And I was like, I'm in shape. Like I run, I go to the gym all the time. Like this is fine. And so I signed up and I just went down and did Kilimanjaro. And did the shortest route that I could find because short on leave days and you want to save them. And so I did a quick trip and it was really fun. And it was kind of just a walk up. And I thought it was going to be a lot harder than it was. Summit day was really rough, getting up in the middle of the night. And it was so cold and snowy that morning that it was like, take your balaclava down, take a breath, like put it right back up. Water bottles were freezing, so we had to put them upside down. So it was like freezing from the top down. But made it up to the top just before sunrise. And the experience of like being at the top and having gone through this for multiple days and like pushing myself to keep going. It was such a cool experience. And it was much easier than I thought it was going to be. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm living in Germany, like I might as well try and knock out the next mountain. Like I'll go do Mount Elbrus, and it was in Russia, a little bit more challenging to go to as an American citizen.
Right.
But got approval and went and climbed Mount Elbrus. So I had to do some ice training and started getting into ice climbing and doing like the learning crampons and how to hike with those and I did a glacier rescue training course. So it was just like kind of dabbling after Kilimanjaro and then did Mount Elbrus. And then Aconcagua was the next one. I was like, well, I'm back here in the US now. I'll try and go down to South America. I knew it's not a technical mountain. It's just really high, but I thought it would be a good experience, see how I did kind of at this, because it's almost 23,000 feet. So it's one of the higher mountains. And I was like, all right, this will be a good chance to see if the altitude is possible to keep hiking at that for me, because altitude affects everybody so differently. But now that this one's done, I'm like, all right, for sure, I really want to do the 7. I think it would be a really challenging goal, but it's such a cool way to do something really unique and push yourself on each of the continents and not just travel, but like go accomplish something. So very different from the beach vacations, but also
just a
I
little
think
bit.
really rewarding.
All right, so we're back now. Hopefully, we don't get any more interruptions with technology on our end. But what I wanted to ask you, Brie, was, you had mentioned that when did Kilimanjaro, you didn't really do a whole lot of the way of like physical preparations for it. You're already in pretty good shape just with doing PT in the Marine Corps and everything like that. But you dialed things in quite a bit when you were getting ready for Aconcagua, as you shared on your social media. So I just, want to take a few minutes just to kind of tell us about, just how did you prepare and what kind of sort of strategy did you have going into getting ready to summit the mountain?
Yes. So Aconcagua is completely different. I wanted, again, limited on vacation days. And so I really needed to shorten the climb dates down. The average climb time for Aconcagua is like 21 days is what most expeditions do. And getting that amount of time off of work is really challenging.
Right.
Like I mentioned, I had just switched over, transitioning out of the Marine Corps, just started a new job in the middle of November. And so I didn't have any vacation days saved up. And thankfully, there's a little bit of time that they give off during the holidays. However, again, I was trying to find the quickest trip. And so I did a bunch of research and found one of the climbs that do a 12-day hike, which is great. It cuts the time nearly in half. And the catch with it, though, is that you have to do this high altitude training leading up to it. And so the company sent me, all of the details, and I reached out, and Hypoxico is the company that does this altitude training. So they send you these home kits that you have like a little altitude generator that you set up in your house, and you have a tiny little tent. So I just did the small one that's like a head bivvy. So it's like big enough that it comes down and sits around my waist when I was sleeping. And there's enough space in there to kind of move around, but sleeping in an altitude tent every night. And then I was doing about 3 to 4 workouts per week it also comes with an oxygen mask. And so wearing that during training to do different workouts. And so it has all these different settings. So you've got to gradually go up your altitude per night that you're sleeping inside the tent. And it goes up to 13,000 feet was the end of where I was sleeping at. And they recommend, getting at least 8 hours. So you're in there a substantial amount of time every day that you're breathing at altitude. And over the course of the 6 weeks, I also had a pulse oximeter, so I was testing oxygen levels. I was getting ready to move into my new house. So I was bouncing in between different friends, staying on their couches and everything. And my first friend was a nurse, and so she was extremely cautious and like watching my oxygen levels, especially in the beginning. But it was, so it's doing this every night. You're sleeping in this little tent and then wearing a mask and doing workouts. And so it was like 20 to 30 minute workouts that I was doing, of a lot on the stair stepper, of just trying to get in shape doing that, carrying kettlebells or wearing a little pack and getting on the stair stepper, doing intermittent running on the treadmill, and then just a variety of different HIIT workouts. But they sent me a little guide and I structured a whole workout plan, but I tried to stick with it as much as possible. It was hard. It was Thanksgiving. Again, it was like moving. And so it was tough, but I really tried to stick with it as closely as I could during that time. And there were only 4 people total on my climb. So when I got down there, the guides, they had just started doing this shortened climb. And so they were very curious about like, how did we follow the guides? Did we actually follow the sleeping plan? And one of the girls, she did 8 weeks and she followed it probably like very intensely, of doing longer workouts every single day. And then the other 2, it didn't sound like they quite followed it. One mentioned he was like, probably like 2 to 3 weeks before I started sleeping in it. But it was only me and the other person that really followed the schedule that were the ones that summited. So I think for doing a short climb like that, it's really important to actually follow a plan. So again, like you said, it was very different from Kilimanjaro, just signing up and climbing up the mountain. That this definitely took it. If you want to do the short climb, like you have to do the altitude training and like the prep work leading up to it to be in good shape and be able to acclimatize really quickly on the mountain.
Yeah, I feel like with high altitude endeavors like this one, because I feel like getting through a lot of tough things, a lot of it is mindset. Like I think about when I went through boot camp.
Yeah.
I mean, mindset was obviously a very powerful thing that kind of got me through that. But I feel like if you're messing around with altitude and your oxygen levels are lower and everything like that is just your body will physiologically just begin to shut down if it's not been acclimatized to that whatsoever. So I think, yes, it's just, you got to be pretty strict with yourself when it comes to those preparations. Otherwise, you are probably setting yourself up for a real world of hurt up there.
Absolutely. And I didn't realize this until afterwards because, again, of our group, only two of us made it up. And then the other person, like on the way back down, was really struggling and falling down a lot. And that's what I was like, it's mental. Like, you have to be mentally tough. And so I was like, no, part of this is physical. Like, there's some point that your body does just start giving out, and you have to really have done that workup and done the training and be prepared for it. But yeah, it's definitely like doing the lead up of, it's both, it challenges you both ways to be able to do the climb.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the altitude that's going to make this endeavor uncomfortable. Of course, it's a snow-capped mountain. It's cold and you're out there for days. You're sleeping in the tent, like, out there too. So I guess just let's talk about just your mornings, because I'm coming with this question from personal experience because just like towards like the end of 2021, I thru hiked across the entire state of Michigan, and I did it kind of late in the year. So like a few weeks of that was actually in full blown winter snow and everything like that. And so I just remembered these mornings where I'm waking up, I'm in my sleeping bag. I can hear snow and wind hitting my tent outside. And the last thing I wanted to do, Brie, was get out of that freaking sleeping bag, get dressed, collapse my tent in the snow, and then walk another 15 miles, but I brought myself to do it though. And I had a big reason why, but that'll be a conversation for a different time. But what was going through your mind when you were having those mornings and that it's going to be awful outside that tent and outside your sleeping bag? So, but what got you out of bed each of those mornings though?
It was definitely having the goal of like, all right, I came here to do a thing. I'm gonna get up and do it. It was especially frustrating. So I had, with gear, anything that you do, you want to pick the right gear and prep it and break it in. And thank you to the airline, they lost my bag going down. And so I arrived, but my bag did not, which was a very expensive mistake, that then I had to go and rent all this gear, but I didn't have nearly everything that I needed. I had just the bare essentials, was like what I was able to rent was what I took up the mountain. A lot of it's like extra, extra large men's jackets that I was wearing and pants, and I'm just trying to like strap it all on. So with that, I rented really as warm of gear as I could. And so with those cold mornings, summit morning, it was -35 when we started. And what you said with like the snow and the wind, you could hear it. And it was 4 a.m, waking up and trying to get dressed. I absolutely did what you're not supposed to and like slept in my gear inside the sleeping bag. The sleeping bag was rated for -40. I am always cold. It could be 70 degrees outside. I'm still in a long sleeve shirt. So I wore all of the gear all of the time. But then I think like once you're up, you're like, all right, I have to do this. And I think military background, you're given a time, you're told to be somewhere, you go up and you show up. It's just frustrating when you're with other people that are not following those times. And you're like, I was here at 4:30 in the morning, ready to go. Now I'm just standing here waiting for others. But it's part of doing an expedition with other people on a climb of like, all right, take all of these small frustrations and don't lose sight of the bigger picture. And I think that was like one of the key things I had to keep in mind the entire climb, is like, especially with the using all of this rental gear that didn't fit me, was like, don't let all of these small frustrations get in the way of like what you want to accomplish. And that's getting up this mountain. But I think that's true in so many other things, is like, you can allow all these like small daily frustrations, and probably on your trip too, to ruin the experience, or you can just like push through and be like, hey, I'm doing this for a reason. I wanted to be here. I'm going to make the best of whatever this -35-degree temperature. It's going to be fine. Just keep moving.
Yeah, I definitely feel like you really need to know your why. I mean, obviously, you started this goal of you want to do all 7 summits, and obviously, the summit of Aconcagua is in your way pretty much. So yeah, you definitely need to keep that in the forefront of your mind. Like for me, when I hiked across Michigan, I mean, I had to hike 1,200 miles and it took me 3.5 months to do. And but I was doing it to raise money for a nonprofit that helps veterans. So that was my big why that got me out of the sleeping bag every day, and also why I knew why I couldn't quit like at the end of the day. But you're right though. It's just when you're in those uncomfortable situations, especially when you're dealing with team dynamics, it's like, yeah, all these tiny, like little things. I think I heard some people use the term the ick or something like that. Just like the tiniest little things will get to you. Like everything from like how someone chews their food, or if they laugh a certain way, or if they like have this, catchphrase that they use that was funny at first. Now it's just downright annoying. So everything like that. So needless to say, lots to contend with other than just the elements up on this mountain. So getting through all that and eventually making it to the summit, just describe that feeling for us, just making it, knowing that, all this work had paid off and you made it through like all the other stuff that came below the mountain. Just describe that sensation to us.
I mean, I think that's the addiction, is like when you're taking those final steps and it's like the final 10 feet to like cross this little bridge of rocks to get to the very top. And you finally make it, and it's completely silent at the top of the mountain. It's I don't know. I think there's two big rewards, is like standing up there and knowing you did it, and then the first beer when you get down off the mountain and you're like, I can't believe like I did it. Like I always say, there's two summits, like making it up to the top and then the first beer at the bottom. But I think it's just like recognizing, it's so easy that you set all these big goals, and then when you accomplish them, it's immediately looking to the next thing of like, all right, what's my next accomplishment? Like, what's the next thing on my list? You have to take time to celebrate those little accomplishments, even in daily life, of like whatever that small thing is that you've been working towards. And the mountain is a big one, but it's taking the time to like recognize, hey, it's all of the moments leading up to this. It's the entire journey. Like, yes, it was difficult and I was super, super frustrated with so many different aspects, but when you get up there, it's completely different. And it's so different from the relaxing vacations where you're enjoying it and you're drinking on a beach and you're playing off of a boat is so much fun. But I think the internal and the intrinsic motivation and the rewards that you get from doing something and accomplishing it just makes you that much more motivated to keep pursuing like whatever those next goals are. And I love that. I love that feeling. And it definitely keeps the drive for like, all right, keep going. What's the next thing? I do want to keep pushing and challenging myself to where else is this going to lead?
Yeah. And speaking of which, I'm pretty sure that our audience kind of wants to know that. I mean, it's just, obviously you're still kind of processing what you just been through, but like you mentioned, there is part of you that is looking ahead to think about the next one. I feel like every time I take on something myself, whether it's like the marathon or an obstacle course race or even my through hike, I mean, there were many times out on the trail where I said, oh, I'm never doing this again. Heck no, I'm not, going to do another long distance walk again. But then, a week later, a couple of weeks after my hike, I kind of get like trail withdrawals. Like, I mean, or some, that's probably not the right term. But anyway, I think to myself, well, dang, I kind of miss adventure right now. So now I'm thinking about what I might want to do next for my own grandio adventure. So I guess getting back to you now, what's on your mind? I mean, what's next? I mean, how do you top this? I guess where do you go from here?
I don't know if you top it, but I definitely agree. And I think the farther away that you get from the experience, all of those negative, bad parts of the trip start to fade. And you really only remember kind of the highlights. The same of military training, where you kind of forget all of the really, really bad times where you're just angry and cold and miserable. And you remember, oh, I met great people and had a great time. But for next, I would love to do Vincent Massif in Antarctica. It's the last continent that I haven't been to. It's going to be another cold climb. So definitely time to break out. Well, now I'm going to use hopefully all of the gear that I got for this trip to go do that one. But yeah, hopefully next December, like that will be the big one. And if I can, I want to try and still squeeze in Carstanz's pyramid. So still working towards those 7, but we'll see what other things come up in the meantime. to be able to go on other smaller trips and keep traveling, keep doing adventurous things, and then get back to the mountain climbing when I can.
Yeah. Well, that is going to be the downside about doing all these summit bids is that, you're just going to be living in cold for a while. So it's just
It's always cold.
yeah. So maybe, yeah, plan more beach vacations just to kind of offset that a little bit. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure. So right on. All right. So, what I want to ask you now, Brie, obviously looking back on, everything that we've talked about so far in this conversation, like going through Marine Corps training, or even before that, just wrapping up high school and college, like so quickly in your life. And then, living and traveling in around Southeast Asia, Europe, and of course, now your goal that you're working towards to go to all 7 summits. Just looking back on it all, and this is really going to be a loaded question, but what would you say have been some of your big, like, key takeaways, and I'll say your greatest life lessons that you learned along the way that you've been able to implement in your life so far?
So I think one is it's very basic, but intentions don't matter. So
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by that is that you can have all of these, and someday, I think that's one of the most dangerous words, is that if you are always planning and you're waiting for right time, the right conditions, when you have enough money saved, you just keep putting trips off. And I think especially during the pandemic, we all saw like how the unexpected can happen, and it can just completely change all of your plans, even if you lay them all out. And so doing things now rather than waiting for someday when it's going to be better timing or better something has been one of the things that I think I learned pretty early on. And so that's why I do a lot of my trips solo. I usually plan all my big adventures out for the year. Even this last climb, I was supposed to have somebody come and join me, a friend of mine. And, when it doesn't work for other people to join, I think it's really important just to push through and do the trips and the things that you want to do and not wait around. I love doing trips with friends, but I think one of the reasons I've been to 115 countries now, and that's because I plan everything, I invite people, and if they come, it's amazing. And if not, I still go and do the trip completely by myself. And I think that was one of my big first lessons is like, don't wait around for other people, because then it's so easy just to like postpone doing different things that you really want to do. And if it's your bucket list, like take control of it, take ownership, and like go find a way to make something happen. And it doesn't always have to be massive trips. It can just be kind of adopting the adventure mentality and living that in your daily life, but finding whatever you're close to and go scuba diving, in a place that's not a dream destination, but at least you're going and doing something is really important, I think.
Yeah, you just made me think of a quote from General Patton. He said that a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. And I love that point you just made, Brie, because I think a lot of people are kind of in a holding pattern that they create from themselves, or they get a lot of paralysis by analysis, where they want to nitpick every little thing or wait for the stars to align perfectly to go out and do something. But that's never going to happen. And I even just think of with just this podcast that I'm doing right now. I got my microphone set up and all this other kit that I got along the way, but I just started off just, talking into a microphone recording app on my phone. I mean, the audio quality sucked, and I want to tell people, I wish I would say, don't do this, but I kind of want people to do it just so they know this lesson is go back and listen to some of my early episodes. Like, I could not speak worth a crap like at all. I was all over the place. And my first guest interviews, I felt kind of embarrassed for my guests because I did not do very well. I'm still not the greatest, but it's just, no one expects you to be great starting off. It's just, you got to get started no matter what.
Mm-hmm. And again, like, I think if you try something and you're outside your comfort zone and you decide you really don't like it, then you don't have to do it again. And if you decide it's something you really love doing, kind of like the mountain climbing has been with me, it's like, all right, I wasn't prepared. Obviously I didn't prepare enough for doing the mountain. But then I ended up loving it. And so now it's something that I actually dedicate time to. And I think there's so many things like that. It's like, give it a try. And if it doesn't work out, great, move on, try something else. And if it does, then cool, you can figure out and continue to improve and find ways to do it better.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone just get out there and get started. I mean, there's really there's I mean, we could really, dive deep into this for sure, but I think that's just the key word there. Just go get started. So right on. All right. Well, before we get to the wrap of our conversation, Brie, I do want to give you a few minutes to tell us a little bit more about your blog, where I'm sure, if people want to learn a little bit more about, some of the stuff that you've done in the past or about your time up on Aconcagua. So tell us about it and where can we go find it?
Yeah, so I started the blog just to kind of capture some of these things. I was doing trips and posting them on Instagram, and I started getting a lot of questions about like, how did you do that? Was it safe? Where did you get this picture? And so that was kind of the intent behind the blog, is just to capture, all the helpful information, give some useful tips. If a country has specific challenges to get into the country, or things like the mountain climbs of gear that's really helpful to have on these different trips, that's kind of the intent behind, is to like capture it, make it a little bit more attainable, and break down some of the basic steps, especially for mountain climbs like this one. I was working on the blog earlier, and so I'll have Aconcagua up posted soon. But it just breaks down like daily, here's what to expect. Here's things that I would have liked to know going into the mountain, of maybe I would have trained more on a specific thing, or it's good to know that, there are bathrooms at certain points and there's Wi-Fi that you can get at different points in the mountain. So it just kind of captures all of those things. And it's the same name as my social media of the Brie Adventure, something I thought of years ago and was like, this is traveling around, and it's just kind of, again, capturing adventure travel ideas, unique destinations like the wine off the shipwreck and places all over the world, just to kind of break down, here's what you need to know, and hopefully give some inspiration of places that people haven't heard of, or help plan trips that they're interested in doing.
All right. And I'll be sure to get everything linked up in the show notes for this episode, so our listeners can go and find them there. Now, as we get further into our wrap up, another thing I like to ask my guests to do is to issue a challenge to our listeners. And we kind of sort of already did this, but maybe I'll ask you to think of a different one as we go. And because as we know, stories, information like we're sharing in this podcast can only take our listeners so far. Action has to follow up in order to get things done. So with that, what challenge would you issue to our listeners today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
Yeah, and so I think we kind of already have talked about this, but I would say finding one thing on your bucket list that's always been a dream trip, or learning to do something, if it's scuba diving, if it's skydiving, whatever one thing is that has been that like, I've always wanted to try this or go there, to just put it, like you said, put it on the calendar and make a plan. And again, invite people, invite friends to join, but if not, just stick with it and actually go and try that thing for the first time. Even if you feel unprepared and not ready for it, just give it a go. And I think that's the first key step in really finding things that you become passionate about later.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, pick the one on your bucket list that scares you the most.
Love it. Yeah. So true. Because I think those are the things, again, like with skydiving, now I'm like, I want to try base jumping. And I think it just builds, and it gives you more courage, and it gives you more confidence once you do that thing. And if it's the scariest thing on your bucket list, then the other things will seem small in comparison.
Yep, my thoughts exactly. You know what they say about great minds, Brie.
They very alike.
Yes. All right. And so what I have for you next is my final three. These are three, I like to think that they're fun questions that I ask all my guests at the end of the show. And so, of course, you're going to get asked these as well. And the first of those three questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
I think Burma. It's one that's usually closed because of political issues that are frequently going on in the country. But I think I was going through a rough time personally, and that was the place that I made it to that kind of re-sparked my desire to travel and to go and do things all around the world. It's off the grid. It's kind of like Cambodia with the different temples that you can go to, but Old Bagan is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and everyone was incredibly friendly, and there's hardly any tourists there. One of the best places I've been to.
That's actually a first. No one's mentioned Burma or answered Burma with this question yet. Not once. So
it's a beautiful place. Highly recommend it whenever it's open and it's free for people to come in. It's a really amazing, especially Old Bagan. It's a beautiful, beautiful place.
All right. Good to know. All right. Next question. What is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do? Since we just talked about bucket lists a little bit here.
So the shark diving, I think that's going to be my next big one that I'm really trying to do, is to go do the great whites off the coast of South Africa. And the base jumping is another thing that, like, eventually, I don't think I'm going to get into the sport, but I'd love to try it at least once. So those are two things. You got 2 for 1 there, of things that I really have wanted to do for a long time, and I'm working towards them.
All right. Well, I can't wait to see like the photos and videos from those adventures. That's going to be awesome. I'm excited. I'm excited to see them. So, and I just might go do it myself. Why not?
Absolutely.
All right. And speaking of animals, that is what my last question entails. And this is a 2-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Favorite animal is probably a tiger. And no, I have not gotten to see them in the wild yet. Did get a really cool, they have a tiger sanctuary in Thailand up in Chiang Mai, and they felt bad for me. This is a great reason, a great plug for solo traveling. They felt bad for me because I was the only person that was traveling alone, and everyone else was in couples or friend groups. So they had 2 baby tigers, and they brought 1 baby tiger, and everyone got to like play with it a little bit and get pictures with it. And they gave me my own whole pen and 1 tiger just to myself to play with. And at the end, they brought the other baby tiger in with me, and everyone else was like, this is so unfair. But they felt bad for me, and they took pity, and they let me play with 2 baby tigers by myself. And it was one of the best days of my life, getting to play with the baby tigers. And I definitely hope to see one in the wild someday. That would be absolutely incredible.
Wow. That would be awesome. Oh, I'm just like picturing this like right now. Imagine just cradling a baby.
Little babies, and they were so small, and they were like, still, you could rough them up and play with them, and got to do like a little tug of war. It was such a cool experience.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, Brie, that's it. That's all the questions that I have for you today. But before we call it a day here, let's just recap one more time where our listeners can go connect with you. So blog, website, social media accounts. What do you got for us?
Yeah, so the blog and Instagram are the 2 ones that I'm most active on, and love to hear from anybody, questions about what we talked about today or anything else, recommendations for other places. I'm always looking for good ideas of places to go or cool experiences that other people have done. So find me on there and send me a message.
All right. And like I said, I'll be getting all those linked up in the show notes for this episode, so our listeners can go and find them there. Well, Brie, I want to thank you very much for taking the time for joining me today. And I know you just got off of the plane not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and you're kind of reeling from this big adventure and fighting off this cold that you brought home with you, unfortunately. But I just really appreciate you and just how you're showing up in the world. Again, it's been great to just connect with you on social media and just see all the positivity that you're putting out there. So yeah, just thanks so much for being here today and sharing your stories and insights with myself and the listeners. It's been awesome.
Awesome. I appreciate it. This has been so much fun, and it's been great chatting about all these different things. It's what fires me up, and I love it.
All right. Right on.